Hi folks, it's Ryan Burns, and with the recent media attention around Richard Floyd McCoy, I feel compelled yet again to point out the many ways that Richard McCoy was not D.B. Cooper. Hey, it would be great if he was Cooper because this mystery could finally be solved and all of us dorks could move on to something else. But he just wasn't Cooper. As John Adams famously said,
"Facts are stubborn things."
We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went.
First off, let's get this out of the way. McCoy was not unique. He was a copycat hijacker. 5 other men besides D.B. Cooper pulled off this exact same heist in the months following the Cooper hijacking. All 5 of these men parachuted out with ransom and all safely landed on the ground, and all 5 were ultimately caught. If you thought it was just D.B. Cooper and McCoy who did this crime, then I understand why it might make someone think that they were the same guy. But parachute hijacking, parajacking, became a fad after Cooper popularized it. McCoy himself got caught up in it. I don't think it would be hyperbolic at all to say that McCoy was a Cooper fanboy. He was apparently enamored with the Cooper hijacking and talked about it to anyone who would listen. There are numerous FBI interviews with associates of McCoy where they are telling FBI agents that McCoy seemingly talked about the Cooper hijacking non-stop and was constantly coming up with ways that he could do it better. McCoy's own sister-in-law told the FBI that he spoke to her about the Cooper hijacking at length, explaining in great detail the improvements that he would make over Cooper, such as bringing his own parachutes or asking for $500,000 instead of $200,000. He even offered her $50,000 if she would help him out with his own hijacking. When the FBI arrested McCoy 2 days after his hijacking, they told him that it was his constant discussion about parachute hijacking that caused some people to immediately turn him in. His response to the FBI was that, quote, "Everyone talked about it and it was nothing unusual," end quote. McCoy was such a Cooper fanboy that at the time of his own hijacking, he was in the middle of writing a term paper on the D.B. Cooper hijacking for his criminal justice class at BYU. In this document pertaining to the search of McCoy's residence, we can see agents reporting how they found McCoy's research folder for his term paper on D.B. Cooper. Okay, now that I've established that McCoy was a boastful copycat and a Cooper fanboy, let's look at the differences between the 2 men and the 2 hijackings. Let's first start out with their physical differences, most notably their age difference. Cooper was described by multiple eyewitnesses as being about 50 years old, or quote, in his 50s. The general consensus from the stewardesses who spent the most time with Cooper was that he was in his mid-40s. The FBI eventually concluded that Cooper was approximately 48 years old. He had some pretty noticeable facial lines due to his age, and one stewardess described Cooper as having a quote, wrinkled older mouth. So Cooper was certainly no spring chicken. Yet, in McCoy's hijacking, the absolute oldest age description you'll find is 30 years old. McCoy's eyewitnesses pegged him as late 20s, 25 to 30, 27, 29, around 30, 27 to 30, 20 years to 30 years old. And while the footage of McCoy we see after his arrest does look like someone older than 30, his eyewitnesses clearly didn't think so. His thin hair and bad comb-over in this footage makes him look older to us 50 years later than he actually would have been if we had encountered him in person, like those eyewitnesses. Next, Cooper was described by stewardess Florence Schaffner as not having any unusual facial characteristics like scars or marks, and stewardess Tina Mucklow concurred that Cooper did not have any unusual scars or marks. His complexion was described as smooth. Yet McCoy was described by one witness as having pitted cheeks, and another reported that he had pockmarks on his cheeks, and that it was possibly acne. Additionally, McCoy had a 1/4-inch scar on his left cheek from where a mole had been removed. To cover this up, he wore a band-aid during his hijacking. Cooper definitely wasn't wearing any band-aids to cover anything up on his face. One of Cooper's only real distinguishing features noticed by a passenger was spotted by Bill Mitchell, who sat directly across from Cooper and had a good side-angle view of the man. Shortly after the hijacking, he was adamant, and still to this day is adamant, that Cooper had a turkey neck. He described it variously to the FBI as a double chin, a sagging chin, and said, quote, "The neck and chin appear as if he had been fat and lost weight, leaving some flabby skin." Another passenger saw something similar and said Cooper had, quote, "looseness in his facial skin." Well, we don't see anything remotely like that with McCoy. Check out his side profile here. He definitely didn't have a double chin or a turkey neck. On the contrary, he appears to be every bit the athletic 29-year-old that he was at the time. Here's another doozy of a difference: the way they talked. Cooper was described as speaking intelligently with a low voice and no accent. The man who sold Cooper his ticket called it a, quote, pleasant voice, whatever that means. Let's contrast that with McCoy. McCoy was born with a defect in his mouth that had to be surgically repaired as an infant, leaving him with a permanent lisp. This lisp was noted by the FBI agents who interviewed him. They said that McCoy rolled his tongue when trying to pronounce certain words. And contrary to Cooper's low voice, McCoy was noted by witnesses to have a high-pitched voice. This speech impediment, combined with this unusually high-pitched voice, was apparently so distinct that McCoy's pilots told the FBI that they thought their hijacker was disguising his voice. But that's just the way McCoy talked. And finally, with regard to their physical differences, I'll point out that every single eyewitness to Cooper was shown photos of McCoy. Photos of him in color, photos of him standing, side profile, you name it. And every single one of these eyewitnesses said that he was not the man who hijacked their plane. Alright, let's move on to their personality differences. Cooper was universally described as being exceedingly chilled out. Pilot William Scott said that Cooper was, quote, calm and self-assured. And co-pilot Bill Radicek said Cooper was as rational as someone could be who would do something like that. Stewardess Tina Mucklow said of Cooper,
he was not nervous. He seemed rather nice, and other than he wanted certain things to be done, he never tried to harm myself. And although he was impatient a few times, he was never cruel or nasty or impolite to me in any way.
This assessment of Cooper is backed up by stewardess Alice Hancock, who described Cooper as being good-natured throughout the hijacking. Hell, Cooper even offered his stewardesses some of his ransom money. For the passengers, Cooper was so nonchalant and unassuming that not a single passenger ever knew they were being hijacked until they were off the plane. On the contrary, McCoy was an absolute nervous wreck during his hijacking. The man was so nervous that he left his typed ransom note inside the airport terminal where he had been sitting before boarding. Before removing the jetway, a gate agent came aboard the plane, holding the envelope high, asking if anyone had forgotten it. McCoy quickly jumped up and grabbed it. Further emphasizing the difference between McCoy and the uber-relaxed Cooper was that McCoy was exhibiting such awkward behavior that the crew of his plane suspected him of being a hijacker before he even began the hijacking. His pilots radioed down to the ground after takeoff from Denver that they believed they had a hijacker on board and were going to fake a mechanical difficulty to land in Grand Junction. But as soon as McCoy heard this, he knew he had been spotted and began the hijacking. So for anyone out there still trying to argue that McCoy was Cooper, why was he calm as a cucumber the first time he's doing this, but nervous and sweating the makeup off his face the second time? Cooper was a noted heavy smoker. Stewardess Tina Mucklow, who sat next to Cooper for hours, stated that Cooper smoked incessantly as they circled over Seattle. Cooper even offered her a cigarette, which she accepted. Yet McCoy, the Mormon Sunday school hijacker, was noted as eating candy throughout the hijacking, and all of his friends in Vietnam have attested that they never saw him smoke. McCoy apologists will write this off and say that McCoy was fake smoking to throw off the authorities since he was a non-smoker. Well, if that's the case and he was Cooper, then why fake smoke on your first hijacking but not on your second? It's just complete nonsense. Next, let's look at how the two were dressed. Cooper's superpower was his ability to blend in. His disguise was his blandness, just a man in a business suit and a raincoat. The only thing he did to hide any of his features was putting on a pair of sunglasses once he began the hijacking. To quote my friend Jude Morrow, Cooper was a real blendy McNobody. Yet McCoy seemed to take the exact opposite approach. He wore a very outlandish outfit with a yellow tie, hideously loud pink flowery shirt, a red jacket, blue bell-bottoms, black gloves, a wig, fake mustache, aviator sunglasses, and skin bronzer makeup. Let's pause to think about this logically. If you were Cooper and your boring attire was so effective during your hijacking, then why in the world on your second hijacking would you do something that deliberately draws attention to yourself? It's totally illogical. What about how they actually went about the hijacking? McCoy used a pistol and a grenade. Cooper's only threat was a briefcase bomb. If McCoy was actually Cooper, again, then why do you change this up when it worked so effectively the first time? The answer is you don't. Another difference is that Cooper didn't specify what type of parachutes he wanted. He just said, "I want 2 fronts and 2 backs." McCoy not only smuggled his own parachutes onto the plane, but he also requested specific parachutes that needed to come from a specific place. When it was time to leave Seattle after getting his ransom items, Cooper just told the crew to fly to Mexico City. He never specified a flight path for them to take, nor did he specify a speed to fly at. He was just like, "Whatever, man, fly south." Yet McCoy was very meticulous and left detailed flight instructions with specific coordinates for the pilots to follow. McCoy was trying to jump to an exact spot. Cooper really had no way whatsoever to do such a thing. He was just jumping wherever. He may have had a rough estimation of where he was, but McCoy was very much trying to jump to an exact spot and pretty much did. Alright then, now that we've got those enormous differences out of the way, let's talk about alibi. Does McCoy have an alibi? I'd say yes, and the FBI felt so as well. During their investigation into McCoy as a Cooper suspect, they interviewed numerous associates of McCoy and checked his credit card usage and bank accounts, and all of this investigation indicated that he was not out of the Provo, Utah area between November 23rd and November 25th, 1971. He was listed as being present on class attendance records for November 23rd at BYU, and the FBI also believed that he was in class on the day of the hijacking. Furthermore, McCoy and his family hosted a Thanksgiving lunch for friends and family, and McCoy was nice enough to invite some exchange students from BYU over. The FBI files contain several interviews with individuals who were there for that Thanksgiving lunch. McCoy and his wife did drive to Las Vegas after that Thanksgiving lunch and spent the night there because they didn't have school or work the next day. Those who push McCoy as Cooper will say, "Aha! This was them going to Vegas to launder the money." They'll point to the fact that Mormons aren't supposed to gamble and that the McCoys would never be going there to do such a thing, so they must have been going there to launder the Cooper money. Yet we have the testimony of McCoy's sister-in-law who says that she was invited to go along with them, but she declined because she didn't have any money for, that's right, gambling. So on top of all the other evidence against McCoy, we have him being home on the morning after the Cooper hijacking. It really beggars belief that he could have jumped from an aircraft into unknown territory at night and then be back home 650 miles away the following morning. Lastly, I'll comment briefly about this parachute that YouTuber Dan Grider found on the property of McCoy's mother in North Carolina. Let's set aside the obvious question of why Cooper would have even considered keeping the parachute he jumped with, as what, a souvenir from a capital crime? I'll instead focus on the many ways that this can't possibly be Cooper's parachute. We have all of the FBI's documents from the hijacking, including interviews with the man who owned the parachute that Cooper jumped with, and also the parachute rigger who packed that parachute. Here are the differences between what we know Cooper's parachute was and this Frankenstein's monster of a parachute that Dan Grider is claiming is McCoy's parachute. First, Cooper's parachute did not have these D-rings. It did not have these cape wells, which are used to detach a malfunctioning canopy. And finally, we know that D.B. Cooper's parachute was a Navy parachute. Navy parachutes have chest fasteners that slide up and down. Air Force fasteners are fixed to the harness with a dedicated webbing. So we can very clearly see that this parachute that he found was an Air Force parachute, not a Navy parachute. So yeah, this just is not Cooper's parachute. Also, I've been scratching my head about why there was no ripcord handle when Grider found this parachute in September 2022, but then there is a ripcord handle on it when he's showing it off later in his kitchen. But then the ripcord handle is once again missing in this photo from when he dropped it off with the FBI in September 2023. Maybe it's just me, but if I actually believed that I found such a true crime holy relic as D.B. Cooper's parachute, I'm not going to be adding and subtracting props to it, nor am I letting anyone wear it for photos. I wouldn't even want to touch the thing myself. So yeah, folks, this parachute has nothing to do with Cooper's hijacking. It just does not. Look, Cooperites like myself are fascinated by the McCoy story. All of the copycat hijackers who pulled this off are interesting in their own right because they give us some possible insight into Cooper's mindset and how he may have escaped. But there is no evidence that McCoy was Cooper, None. There isn't even any circumstantial evidence that points toward him being Cooper that can't be scrutinized and quickly dismissed. This is not an attack on McCoy. McCoy led a fascinating and tragic life, but Richard Floyd McCoy was a D.B. Cooper copycat. He was not D.B. Cooper. It's not any more complicated than that. Period.